Okay, well, that's done, which is nice because it means I can finally take this off. I mean, it's such a facade.
Nathan? Hang on.
Oh, hey, Steph. Great day to be not a Christian, isn't it?
Have mercy upon us, lowly creatures!
Was I saying something?
This is fun. Welcome back to Faith on Film, where we're in church library and search the good stuff. And welcome to the end of the Gospel according to Stephen Schwartz. This has been an interesting little review, hasn't it? We started off in the 70s with Jesus, then we did a drastic U-turn all the way back to creation, then we dropped him down into the Middle Ages for a minute, and now whoosh, back to Exodus we go.
To properly set the stage for this movie, we'll need to go back to 90s Disney. This was the era known as the Renaissance. No, the other one. This was a time of big critical and financial success for the studio, and included such things as last episode's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And one Jeffrey Katzenberg, the then chairman, was gunning for the position of president of the company. But the job went to Michael Eisner instead. So, in what amounted to a professional hissy fit, Jeffrey Katzenberg left the studio and started his own with the help of Steven Spielberg and David Geffen.
That's the abbreviated version. For more information, well, there are plenty of videos floating around YouTube and on the internet on this subject.
For their debut picture, DreamWorks Studios was going to do something universal, like the striving for human freedom and dignity. And so Steven Spielberg said, like the Ten Commandments, and thus the idea for the Prince of Egypt was born. Unfortunately, it was not their actual debut because they shuffled around the release of Ants. You know, for spite.
It's a shame, too, because The Prince of Egypt was a great movie, and a movie that's reputation has only grown over time. Now, as we discussed back in our Ten Commandments review unit, the story of Moses is a story that has been covered many times. In fact, it's been adapted almost as often as the story of Jesus. So, the challenge was how to make this particular retelling feel fresh and original. It would take not only great animation, but great writing, great casting, great music, and so on.
And naturally, it is time to revisit our Moses movie checklist. Starting with the exposition. It's flawless! According to one report, Stephen Schwartz was so excited about working on this project that he came to his first meeting about writing the soundtrack with the first song, Deliver Us, already completely written. He was so passionate about being on Prince of Egypt, he turned down Mulan.
You know, I don't think I mind that. I think it worked out for both movies.
Deliver Us is so good a song, I almost feel intimidated trying to talk about it. In no time at all, we learn about the Hebrews' lot in life as slaves, their relationship to God as his chosen people, the fact that they have been promised a promised land, etc.
What is particularly amazing to me is just how huge this movie feels right out of the gate. It's been said that the filmmakers took inspiration from director David Lean, and I would believe that. Ancient Egypt just feels grandiose right out of the gate, and we haven't even gotten to the part where the divine enters the equation. And this feeling of size and scope doesn't drop off for a minute throughout the runtime of this movie.
Speaking of the divine, one subtlety underlying these lyrics is that the Hebrews exclusively refer to God as they would have canonically. It's easy to overlook, since some parts of Genesis will refer to God as Yahweh, but God does explicitly say in Exodus 6 that the Hebrews knew him as El Shaddai, but by his name Yahweh they did not know him prior to that point. As such, the Chorus of Hebrews refers to him as Elohim, God Most High, in reference to the name El Elyon, which I've talked about before. While we're talking about the language, Yocheved addresses baby Moses in Hebrew, but what impressed me is that her lyrics translate to, "My good and tender son, don't be frightened and don't be scared."
So?
She's saying that as the Egyptian troops are passing by within earshot, she's addressing him as her son in their native language because, guess what? The Egyptians were looking for baby boys.
Moses' mother is voiced by Israeli singer Afra Haza, who voiced Yocheved not only for the English release, but for 17 of the film's international dubs. Wow. And yes, that is Haza's voice reprising the final Deliver Us at the end of the movie. Now, here's something interesting. The reprisal of Yocheved's lullaby, sung by Miriam when Moses discovers his heritage, that is actually the voice of Brenda Chapman, one of the film's directors. She provided the line in a scratch take that was going to be properly dubbed over later. But when they listened back, they decided that it was actually really good, and they decided to keep it.
Moses encounters Aaron and Miriam by chance, and she excitedly thinks he's come to free them, only to be disappointed that he has no idea who they are. This conversation escalates to the point that he's prepared to punish her for insulting him by calling him an adopted slave. Then Miriam sings Yocheved's lullaby, and that makes him realize that she might be telling the truth. I've made fun of this scene. On paper, it's pretty friggin' silly. I mean, he hears a lullaby he heard probably once when he was maybe a year old, if that, and that somehow sends him into an existential crisis? Come on!
Moses movies always have really bizarre ways for him to find out his heritage. I think that's just par for the course at this point.
It didn't let me finish.
Sorry.
Logically, this does not hold water, even taking into account that Moses was humming the melody earlier, unconsciously. On an emotional level, this 100% works. And I think it's entirely due to how effective that dang song is.
I will maintain that Linus Roach in the 2006 miniseries The Ten Commandments is the best depiction of Aaron in a movie or a show. However, I don't mind the liberties that the Prince of Egypt took with Aaron as a character. Voiced by Jeff Goldblum. And the way this character is written plays to Goldblum's strengths. And I think had these lines been read by another actor, it might not have worked as well. Can you just imagine this Aaron talking to the Pharaoh like he does in the Bible?
My king, my brother, well, your brother, our brother, not that you're my brother, you know what I mean. Well, he says that our God, not to be confused with any of your gods, whom I'm sure are lovely. He says that you should let us go. Listen, I'm sure this is a very trying and personal time for you, so you take a couple days and you think about it. We've been doing this for a couple 100 years. We'll just be outside, working on the city with your name on it.
Aaron is very much in survival mode, and he speaks for the frustrated Hebrews when Moses' first appearance in Pharaoh's court gets their workload doubled. Basically, rather than introducing a bunch of bit characters to express the frustration at Moses' not always great leadership, all those lines go to Aaron. And I think that works. It's using your time economically. And the animosity between Moses and Aaron is resolved over time. On their way from Egypt to the Red Sea, Aaron puts a congratulatory hand on his brother's shoulder. And it's important that Aaron did this completely on his own. And he's the one who takes the first steps of faith in crossing the parted Red Sea.
There's also a separate but related arc that Aaron goes through. His very first line is, "Miriam, do you want to get us flogged?" Even when faced with the possibility of being freed. And this is reinforced a few scenes later when Miriam is expressing her horror at the old man being brutally beaten, and Aaron just hunkers down and focuses on his own chiseling. This is an Aaron who has given up. Not without reason. We were shown early on that even slaves helping other slaves back onto their feet get mistreated. But as Moses comes in and gives them more reason to hope and effectively changes their mindset, Aaron starts to open up to the people around him, to the point that his final line is to an old woman he is helping up onto a rock during the crossing of the Red Sea, "I've got you, I've got you."
Moses' sister Miriam, voiced here by Sandra Bullock, is the steadfast and faithful one, ready to give Moses emotional support whenever he needs it. And what's neat is they plant this idea in her pretty early. After she sees that Moses is safe with the queen, she says, "Grow, baby brother, come back someday, come and deliver us too." She's basically a prophet in miniature.
Then there's the other Hebrews as well. None of them are really given focus as individuals, but they all have their own unique looks and mannerisms. There is an arc running throughout the entire community. This is a people who are just broken because their families have been slaves for all of living memory, and they have no foreseeable alternative. This is exemplified well when Moses trips over an old man, and once the man realizes who it is he's collided with, he cowers in fear, obviously in anticipation of a beating. He was the one bumped into, and he still expects to be flogged.
Much like Aaron, though, their outlook changes when they're given a reason to hope again. This culminates in the final song, "When You Believe," which won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Now, while I think Deliver Us is actually the best song, I will say When You Believe is a pretty great piece on its own, especially the portion in Hebrew. Schwartz really does have a talent for integrating other languages. The text sung here is Exodus 15, also known as the Song of the Sea. Just an aside, textual critics commonly believe that this is the earliest portion of the book of Exodus, possibly even a primary source, based on the syntax and vocabulary reflecting an earlier period than the rest of the text. The quoted portion means, "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness? In your love you lead the people you have redeemed." It starts as one child singing, and then a chorus. And then it culminates in all of the people singing that there can be miracles. It's an excellent way to show their mentality coming into freedom. I just love the look of confidence on this one woman's face as Moses enters the Red Sea. It's like she's expecting a miracle at this point.
Singing along with Miriam in When You Believe is her sister-in-law Zipporah, voiced by Michelle Pfeiffer, who, yes, is one of the few leads to do her own singing. We are introduced to her earlier than usual by means of her being captured and presented to young Rameses as a gift for his entertainment.
Rape.
That thing! Ugh. When he doesn't like how feisty and aggressive she is, she's a prisoner. He instead offers her to Moses. Moses goes up to his chamber to realize that she has escaped. While he doesn't initiate her rescue, he does help her by distracting the guards, and this sets the stage for them falling for each other later in Midian.
Her father, Jethro, the high priest, is portrayed as a sagely man who doesn't take himself too seriously. He's kind of a goofball, but he has an aura of dignity about him. He's a dignified goofball, if you will. He's written kind of like Jesus was in Godspell, which is probably a coincidence, but who knows.
Zipporah from the Burning Bush onwards is primarily just support, but don't take that to mean she's not a functional character. She expresses doubt about Moses' ability to fulfill his mission. She's also the one to explicitly confirm when he has completed said mission.
There are two other things about the way Zipporah is written that I really like. Their life together in Midian really is the happiest that Moses has ever been. And secondly, I really like the creative decision to have Moses tell Zipporah about his encounter with God without any audible dialogue. Basically, the filmmakers felt it would be dishonest to put somebody else's epiphany into words, so they just let the music convey all the emotions.
And that brings us to the big Yod himself, Yahweh. Honestly, I'm prepared to call this one of the, if not the, most accurate depiction of the God of the Hebrew Bible put to film. He's awe-inspiring, friggin' terrifying, astounding, powerful, loving, prone to anger, at large, in charge, and somehow none of those feel out of place next to each other because he is just so much beyond the comprehension of humans. It was originally intended to be voiced by all the major players in the cast to show how he is reflected by all of humanity in certain aspects. But by the time they started mixing the voices together, it became clear that it was difficult to understand. So instead, Val Kilmer's voice was brought to the front. But you can still hear the other characters' voices underneath his if you listen closely.
See, this is what I mean by the movie just keeps feeling huge. In addition to David Lean, the filmmakers took aesthetic inspiration from the paintings and engravings of Gustave Doré and Claude Monet. And by the by, you have actually seen more of Doré's work than you realize. Now, the first sign that God gives the Pharaoh when Moses appears in his court is changing Moses' staff into a serpent. And of course, the high priest do the same thing. We all know how the story goes. It's been observed before, but it was a good decision by the animators to have a blinding flash of light right before the high priest's staffs changed into serpents, because you could read it as an elaborate sleight of hand. It also should be noted that Moses wins this fight in that his serpent devours the priest's serpents. But nobody actually sees this because they're too distracted by the high priest's showmanship. This is also an interesting move that you can read a lot into, and that it could be implied that the judgment of God sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Also, if you're looking closely, the texture of the water into blood that the priests perform for Rameses is easily a different texture than the water into blood in the Nile River. Well done.
When the rest of the plagues hit, we're treated to a musical number to, well, speed things along. This was originally going to be just an instrumental piece with Moses and Rameses' emotions on the subject being conveyed solely through their facial expressions. But the filmmakers felt like it was missing something. So Schwartz wrote another song to get into those emotions in greater detail. And I'm grateful that he did, because it really allows us to get into the head of Rameses, played and sung by Ray Fiennes. Rameses is much more complex than he usually is, and a large part of that is that he and Moses are as thick as thieves as brothers, as close as two siblings could be. Not that close! Get your mind out of the gutter! Yeah. No. They have a really believable bond. And that is a large motivating factor into why he is so adamant about not freeing the slaves, because he feels hurt that Moses came back to Egypt for them and not for him. This is shown elsewhere too, but it really sinks in when he has a whole verse about how he's mystified that the man he once called his brother is wrecking his kingdom.
The other driving force behind Rameses' absence is the controlling influence of his father Seti, voiced by Sir Patrick Stewart. Seti instills in Rameses the importance of maintaining the ancient traditions, and how even a slightly less efficient and effective ruler is all that's necessary for everything to come toppling down. And you can see Rameses trying to mold himself in the form of Seti.
Be still, Pharaoh speaks.
Still, Pharaoh speaks.
One thing that I do appreciate about this movie is it does not even slightly let Seti off the hook. You may recall I criticized the 1956 movie for portraying Seti as this kindly grandfather who everybody loved. Only Rameses was the bad guy dictator, even though Seti himself was just as complicit in the systemic evil that his son was. This movie does not do that. Rameses is portrayed more sympathetically. He didn't create this world, he inherited it. Once Moses learns the truth about Seti, he can't see the man as anything other than a monster. And Seti doesn't really regret anything that he's done. When Moses asks him about the slaughter of the Hebrew infants at the beginning of the movie, Seti just passes it off rather callously as a sacrifice that needed to be made for the greater good. And they were only slaves. And the last we see of Seti, he is slowly fading into the background darkness of his own hall.
Rameses' big moment is during the 9th plague, when Moses comes to talk to him one-on-one like they used to. Already drunk before Moses arrives, Rameses goes on a bit of an emotional roller coaster throughout the early part of the scene. Shouting angrily at Moses, happily reminiscing about the good times they had, pleading that they could go back to the way things were. But all pretense of a once happy family goes out the window when he realizes his son has entered the room, and he now only sees Moses as the enemy rather than Moses the brother. You can actually see the moment where Rameses no longer thinks of them as brothers.
You Hebrews have been nothing but trouble. My father had the right idea about how to deal with your people.
He is then left a bitter shell of a man after his son dies in the 10th plague, only able to give a terse, "Leave me!" And you don't even need a separate scene showing him fuming up into wanting to pursue the escaped slave population. He conveys that entire emotional journey with a single, scornful look as Moses walks away.
It's been said before that this movie really took advantage of the whole Moses and the Pharaoh being brothers angle of the Exodus story more than any version before or since, for that matter. And I would have to agree. That's because this movie lets them be not only brothers, but best friends. We see these guys be reckless teenagers together. We see them get into trouble together, stick up for each other, talk to each other about their insecurities and fears, horseplay together, just being friends. Basically, they really want to hit home the idea that these are brothers in every sense of the word. They're not just using the word brother or family to stir up an emotional reaction out of the audience without putting in any of the effort. These are brothers, first and foremost. Toddler Rameses is even inserted into Moses' adoption scene. That is how inseparable these two characters are. It's actually heartbreaking when they inevitably become enemies.
Moses, as voiced by Val Kilmer, is easily one of the best written versions of this character. This time around, Rameses is always slated to be the next pharaoh, so Moses never really develops a sense of responsibility. He's just a spoiled rich kid who gets to goof around and not face any real consequences. He has a good heart in there somewhere, as demonstrated by how he aids Zipporah's escape, but he doesn't really concern himself outside of his immediate sphere of influence, especially his immediate family. Until he learns that the only thing separating him from those slaves he doesn't think twice about is a simple quirk of circumstance. Then he becomes very suddenly aware of how horrifying the system is and his own complicity in it. To underline this, the infamously cruel taskmaster that Moses winds up killing is beating an old man who is cleaning up a mess that Moses created.
So it's interesting. Moses doesn't straight up murder the taskmaster like he does in the Book of Exodus. He kills him completely by accident, knocking him off of a high scaffolding. Now, you could interpret this as softening the harder edges of the story to make it more child-friendly. And that's probably true, but it's interesting to note that Moses himself does not make a distinction. accident or not, he's still a killer. And then Rameses comes in saying that he can make it so it never happened. And that just drives home to Moses how privileged he really is, and it's too much.
He can't bring himself to live in this society now that he's aware of its sins, so he instead sets off on his own. When he is found by the Midianites, he says he has done nothing in his life worth honoring. And then when he's given his mission by God, he says he doesn't deserve to speak to the Hebrews because he was the son of the man who slaughtered their people. To perhaps put too fine a point on it, Moses is, at this point, is a pretty good metaphor for your standard liberal guilt. It's the same kind of mentality as thinking that your individual choice to use or not use a plastic straw is going to have a significant influence on the environment. What Moses has to learn is that it's not enough to simply remove yourself or minimize your part in a damaging system. You have to actually dismantle the system in order to actually help people.
This is the main divide between Moses and Rameses, how they view the system. Rameses looks back on Seti and sees a great leader. And the way things are is the way things are. Moses sees a kingdom built on the back of slaves, and sees Seti as a man whose hands bore the blood of thousands of children.
Rameses is oddly a little like Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, in that he views tradition as very important to the point of just going along with it. And who has the right, as ruler of the world, to dictate who will live or die? The Pharaoh. The Pharaoh. Tradition.
Okay, so his views on tradition are a little more overtly wrong.
Obviously.
But the point remains that change is hard. Especially when it's the right thing to do.
Moses is also beat up about the things God expects of him. You can tell he was gearing up to square off against Seti, whom he came to despise, so it's a deep shock to him that his opponent is Rameses, whom he loved. And what's also great is Moses breaks down sobbing after the 10th plague. Like, this is a far cry from Charlton Heston, who struts about singing praises, completely ignoring the pain that Rameses and all of Egypt were in.
Take what spoils from Egypt you will, but go!
O Lord God, with a strong hand thou dost bring us out of bitter bondage. Tomorrow we go forth a free nation, where every man shall reap what he has sown, and bow no knee except in prayer. We will go with our young and with our old, with our sons and with our daughters.
Did I mention our sons loudly enough? We still have those. This is a Moses who sympathizes even with those God passes judgment on, and that says a lot about his character. They don't actually get to the point where Moses and God have an argument like they do in the book, because we cut off right before the golden calf. But you can see their relationship starting to trend that way. But what I appreciate is that Moses is not looked down upon by the movie for feeling like he does.
You know, since you mentioned the golden calf, it's interesting how not interested in the conflict between the Hebrews and Moses as their leader this script is overall. It really doesn't come up. Except, okay, it comes up that one time when after Moses' first appearance in Pharaoh's court doesn't go well, but that's basically it. They don't even have somebody say the line, "Why did you bring us out here to die? Were there not enough graves in Egypt?" when they think they're cornered at the Red Sea. The 2006 miniseries thrived on this conflict, and the 56 Ten Commandments brought it up too, even if they did choose to portray this as someone who thought he was kind of above everybody else. But you know, I don't think that leaving this conflict out is a bad thing. Because ultimately, this film was trying to find a unique way to retell the Exodus story. And I think they found it. By choosing to focus on Moses' internal conflict about his dual identity. Is he Egyptian or is he Hebrew? That's what the dang title of the movie is about. Is he the Prince of Egypt or is he something else?
So, you ever notice how Moses has an American accent, but Rameses, Seti, and Tuya all have British accents?
Mother, am I adopted? What makes you say that, love? Oh, nothing.
One last thing I have to compliment this movie on is how maturely it tackles some of the heavier aspects of its source material. We're talking about a story of slavery and genocide. And what's worse, a lot of these brutal things happen to children. Did that kid just get pulled up by his hair? It rides the fine line of depicting things that are not normally thought of as family-friendly, but doing them in a tasteful enough way that you don't feel bad about sitting your kids down and watching this with them. Kids need to be exposed to some of the harsher realities of the world. And if done in a safe environment, these things can be discussed in a way they can understand without necessarily being too frightened. And the same goes for tragedy, brutality, and so on. And you can't trivialize slavery, especially on this scale.
They don't trivialize the acts of God either. This is a God who kills kids. And there's not really an indication that they go to heaven or anything like that. It's just laid out there for the audience to grapple with. There is some degree of moral whitewashing.
No kingdom should be made on the backs of slaves.
But it's done in the service of a greater point. And honestly, I'd rather have kids look up to a Moses who says that than the filmmakers try to lionize or justify the laws condoning slavery in the Mosaic Covenant.
This movie really earned its PG rating, didn't it? And it's funny, not even The Hunchback of Notre Dame was rated PG. Go figure. Speaking of ratings, I'm gonna go for it. I'm also gonna give The Prince of Egypt a practically perfect in every way. The animation is spectacular. The music is amazing. Stephen Schwartz really brought his A-game to this one, as did composer Hans Zimmer. The character designs are great, they're all matched with just the right voice, but the real star here is the writing. The characters feel authentic and genuine, and the dynamic between Moses and Rameses is brilliant. There's just the right amount of tragedy and triumph to make The Prince of Egypt one of the all-time greats.
What's also great is, even though this is so close to the beginning of DreamWorks and is thus tied up into Jeffrey Katzenberg's departure from Disney, you can't tell. As we mentioned, Ants beat this to the theater in 1998. Their breakout film, Shrek, came in 2001 and was pretty transparently the DreamWorks staff venting their frustrations with their former employers. So, sandwiched between ripping off Disney and ripping on Disney, you find The Prince of Egypt, which, as Dick Van Dyke might put it, was their attempt to out-Disney Disney. And it really works. It stands on its own. Like, you can draw lines of stylistic influence here and there. But this feels like its own thing. This stands above and apart from the majority of the Disney Renaissance. I'd put it on par with Beauty and the Beast, and you know how highly I think of that movie.
Thank you for joining us for Faith on Film. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Nathan. We'll see you next time.
Moses is... I think I moved my foot.
How dare you.
I think they found it. They focused on Moses' internal. Although he probably did have that conflict for the rest of his life, given the way this character was written, so it sort of was eternal, I suppose.
Moses, we haven't been in Egypt for 30 years. Are you still thinking about it? Yeah, should I go back? Singing along with Miriam in When You Believe.
Or just your keyboard. Your thing is still on.
Yeah, it is.
There we go. All the way back to creation. Then we dipped into the Middle Age for ages for... I'm going to start that again. Because it's Middle Ages, not Middle Age. That's something entirely different.
Middle-aged hunchback. You know, when I was your age, people only threw tomatoes at me. It was great. When the plagues do hit, we're treated to a montage. No.
Gustave Doré and Pierre Monet.
Claude Monet. And one weak link can break the chain of a mighty dynasty.
I will not be the weak
You
link.
have my permission to go.
Is ready to give him, I was going to say a pep talk, but that does. That sounded wrong.
Go get him. You got this, bro.
Go Moses, go Moses.
You believe in God, but I believe in you.
That might be the best one yet. Oh dear. Anyway, what was the actual wording there?